Today on my D&D rants, I'm going to talk about how I start campaigns. Now, I'm not going to go into details about planning the world, which is something you do need to do. You need to come up with a basic concept, a basic, not driving force, but a basic, just a basic world, like, for instance, in the one I'm running, Ignatia, first thing I did was come up with 7 continents, and then I described them, where they are in the world, their climate, their government, their, how much is explored, how much isn't explored, what is there to do if you go to these places. You do that. I make a list of gods and deities in my world, and then you take a step back and you go, okay, the broader picture's done, but what about where the players are starting? For that, I recommend small town, something small enough that you can populate it with a few NPCs, but you don't have to make 10 or 20 NPCs they could potentially run into. They can run into 5. Something easy to play in, especially if it's your first time. Now, after that, one thing you definitely want to do, and something I'm guilty of not doing, is trying to integrate your players into the world. The best way to do this is to come up with a background and a driving force for the player. For instance, in the campaign I ran with Miney, Javon, and Manny, Manny's character was a Firbolg who was looking for his brother who had been displaced by the Empire, the military they were currently not actively against, but they all were, if caught, enemies of the Empire. So his goal was to try and find his brother who had been displaced, and he was just looking for him. Miney and Javon had a joint backstory. They both were experimented on by a wizard, and this wizard had made Miney into a cross between a regular sorcerer and a wild magic sorcerer, and he made Javon into a necromancer, which was a homebrew in the last video I talked about. Their driving force was revenge. They wanted revenge on the wizard who also had killed Javon's brother, and Javon had brought back as a creature that he controlled. That was their driving force. And that campaign, after I had done all that, lasted the second longest. In Death Crew, my longest running campaign, I almost didn't do this. They came up with this completely on their own, the players. They each came up with a backstory, which is something they should do, but you should sit down with your players and connect the backstory to the world. You don't want them saying, oh, you don't want them to go crazy and say something like, oh, I'm the lost heir to a kingdom, and if I ever find it, I'm going to inherit immense wealth. You want it within reason. If that's something you want and the DM agrees with it, that's fine. But the DM should always have an impactful force in the backstory. As in, the DM should know what the backstory is, help craft it, and connect it to the world, whether it be through, oh, you're from this area, you're related to this, and this. The DM needs to be involved in the backstory. In Death Crew, the reason Death Crew even happened was because I was on a break. I had taken a break from my previous group, and I wasn't really playing. And my cousin Connor came to me and he said, hey, me and my buddy Lee want to play a campaign in a floating city. And that's all they gave me. And I took like 2 days, crafted a flying city called Dextros, and I went from there. That campaign lasted the longest, but I literally had no world building. I took a floating city and just rolled with it. And the reason the campaign lasted as long as it did was because I took their backstories and I integrated it into the world, not seamlessly, but to the extent to the extent that their motivations directly moved the campaign along. For instance, Octavian, Connor's character, was a bard, an undead bard, who was looking for a way to get from undead to human again, so he could live. Mars was the son of almost like a cult. He was the son of a cult leader who would fake undead invasions, get the kingdom to pay him, and then he'd get rid of the invasion. It was a scam he was running. And Hugo, Dave's character, the one whose his backstory became the main driving force of the campaign after a certain point, was trying to stop a criminal gang called Iron Solutions from basically continuing to do nefarious acts. In his backstory, they had taken his business and ran his name through the dirt. So his goal was to get revenge. And all those things tied together, and the campaign was the longest running one I've ever had. Mars' story came to a head. Octavian got his story to a head. And Hugo, his story drove so much. I literally took his story and ran with it to the extent that the final boss that they fought was directly linked to that gang. And they went from levels 3 to, I can check it real quick. They went from level 3, please load. They went from level 3, all of them, to level, I'm on D&D Beyond. They went from level 3 to level 15. Longest running campaign I've ever had. And all because I integrated the background. All because I took their backstories and put them into the world to the extent that they were a driving force and something mattered. If your player comes to you and says, I don't really have a backstory, you need to sit down and you need to plan something. Because if they don't have motivation, you're going to get to the next city, throw a quest at them, and it's going to be like that. It's going to be, to the quest board. There's no, what's the word? There's no urgency. It's just go to the next job. But if something directly linked to the character's backstory, then you get a better campaign, in my opinion. And that's something I'm guilty of. I have a habit of I want to play so bad that I don't sit down with my players and come up with a backstory. For instance, the one I'm doing now, Hellhounds, I sat down with each player before we started playing, and everybody but Patrick, who still has to come up with his backstory, they came up with a backstory. They came up with reasons to be exploring, reasons to do what they're doing, and gave me little tidbits that I can throw into the campaign at a later date, and they can run with it. But I guess what I'm saying is backstory is important. It doesn't seem as important when you're making your character because you're thinking, I just want to play, especially as new players. But the campaign will benefit so much from just having a little bit of player involvement. You can plan your world all you want, but at the end of the day, if it's just a place for them to go from job to job, it's going to get boring fast. At least I think that. But I guess the question of today was, what is your favorite background you've ever come up with a character? Your backstory. What's your favorite one? Which one have you thought back and said, you know what, that was great, I loved it, and I'm so happy I came up with it? And I guess that's the question in the comments. So thanks for watching.